And welcome back. Most of the time, if we want a device, a computer, to be in a specific VLAN, what we'll do is we'll take that computer and we go to the RJ45 connector on this network interface card. We take an RJ45 cable, unshielded twisted pair cable, plug it in, and then the other end of that cable would go into either a jack in the office, which would get wired over to the wiring closet. From there, we may have some punch downs, and it's going to lead to a switch port eventually. So on that switch port, if we want this computer to be in VLAN 10, we would configure that switch port to have the native VLAN of 10. And ta-da! We're done. This device is now in VLAN 10. So let's go ahead and flip it a little bit. What if we want this computer, regardless of where it plugs into the network, we want it to be a member of VLAN 10 or 20 or 30 based on some characteristic of this computer? Can it be done? The answer is absolutely yes, with a little feature called NAC, N-A-C, which stands for Network Access Control. So let's draw our beautiful diagram of a FortiSwitch switch. And let's imagine that if we have a yellow color, that would be VLAN 10. And a purple color here would represent VLAN 20. And let's put some computers over here. And let's call those device A, B, C, and D, and these can be ports 1, 2, 3, and 4. So instead of just assigning these ports, for example, as the native VLAN of 10 or 20, what we could do is we could set up some rules. And these rules are in the form of a network access control or a NAC policy. In our NAC policies, they're processed very much like a firewall or a security policy from top to bottom until it finds a match. So one of our NAC policies could say, if the MAC address equals that, then go ahead and associate the native VLAN for that port it's connected to as VLAN 10. And the options here regarding what we can match on is fairly extensive. So the idea with network access control is that we can specify that these ports should respond based on the NAC policies that are in place. So when device A connects to this port, based on the matching rules, it can be assigned to, for example, VLAN 10. Or if device A connects to this port, once again, because the NAC policy is in place and based on a match, it can be assigned to VLAN 10. While device B, when it connects to a port, again, regardless of which port it connects to, based on its characteristics and our NAC policy, it can be assigned to, for example, VLAN 20. And that would be true for device B if it connected to port 2 or 3 as well. So let me clean this up a little bit and let's make a game plan. And let's focus on just one port. In fact, let's use port number 2 on our switch number 1. So this is going to be port number 2. This is our switch number 1. And it just so happens that off that port, I have a very flexible device over here, which happens to be a Cisco Catalyst switch on FA0/1. And I've configured that port on this switch so that it is a layer 3 port. It's also a DHCP client. So as an example, let's set up a NAC policy that says if the MAC address is 001111111234567891101112. So if that's the MAC address, then we want to assign that port number 2 to VLAN 10. Or if the MAC address is the same thing but ending in 22, so instead of :11 it's :22, then we want the native VLAN for that port to be VLAN 20. So let's do some quick verifications of our connectivity here between our switch number 1 on port 2 and the Cisco switch here on FA0/1, and then we'll create our policy and verify that it works. All right, so here we are on firewall 1, and let me go ahead and just go down to the Wi-Fi and switch controller section right here, and we'll click on Manage FortiSwitches just to make sure that all our FortiSwitches show up. They do. We're going to focus our attention on this bad boy, which is switch number 1, and to see the individual ports on that switch, we just go down to the FortiSwitch ports, and here is port number 2. Currently has the native VLAN set to VLAN 10, and the device information is showing Cisco switch here, and the link is green. That's great. So if we go over to that Cisco switch, which is just acting as a node in this scenario, we can also confirm it from there as well. So here is that Cisco switch. If we did a show LLDP neighbor, because LLDP is enabled on the FortiSwitch by default, and I also enabled it here on the Cisco switch, so it should be able to tell us details regarding where it's connected. So it has a few connections here. The one I'm most interested in here is switch number 1. So this basically says that on this local Catalyst switch, on my local port Fast Ethernet 0/1, I've learned about a device called Switch 1, and Switch 1's remote port that I'm connected to is port number 2. We can also see more detail on that by doing a show LLDP neighbor, a question mark, and I'm going to back that off, and I think I can do entry. Yeah, let's do show LLDP entry, and then the name of that switch, and then we'll press enter. And that's giving us a great deal of information learned via LLDP about that FortiSwitch. I also want to verify I got an IP address already. Show IP interface brief. And this says I have learned an IP address dynamically with DHCP. It is 10.10.0.101. And that's because the VLAN 10 interface on the FortiGate has DHCP services enabled. So if we are going to go back to the switch and we said we want to assign this instead of VLAN 10, we said we want to put it in VLAN 20. So we'll select VLAN 20, click on apply. Now it's in VLAN 20. If we go back to the Cisco device, do a quick show IP interface brief. Yeah, still hanging on to the old IP address, but if we do a shutdown for that interface, and then I do a no shutdown, and now through the DHCP process, he's been assigned something on the 10.20 subnet, which is associated with VLAN 20. So I just want to verify that both VLANs are good to go. So let's minimize that. And in a moment, after we configure our NAC policy, we're going to change the mode for this port. Instead of saying static, we'll come down to mode and we'll say we want to use network access control. But we need to create a NAC policy first. So to do that, over here on the left, we're going to go down a couple below FortiSwitch ports, down here to NAC policies. So here I have a NAC policy I was playing around with earlier, currently is disabled. So let's go ahead and create a brand new NAC policy. So to do that, with NAC policy selected, we'll click on create new. And I'm going to call this assign to VLAN 10. And then for the device pattern, I'm going to specify characteristics of the device. And for our example, I'm going to base it on the MAC address. However, there are other options here, including hardware vendor, device family, type, etc. So I'm just going to go ahead and look for the specific MAC address. And based on our plan, it was 001111111111. Great. So there should be 12 characters there. And in Fortinet, they separate the first two characters from the next two with a little colon. Other vendors will use a period. Some vendor use 4 characters in a period. And regardless, it's just a way that that vendor is using to represent those 48 bits, those 12 hexadecimal characters. So if that's the case, if this is the MAC address that shows up, then what do we want to do? So down here on the switch controller action, let's go ahead and do an assign VLAN. Let's assign the VLAN to VLAN 10. And by default, bounce port is enabled. And that's going to make sure that the client, when they connect after the NAC policy has been matched here and they're assigned to VLAN 10, by bouncing the port, we're effectively forcing DHCP activity, either a renewal or a failure of the renewal, and then that would lead to a lease of a brand new IP address on the correct subnet. All right, so let's click on OK there. And let's create a new one regarding VLAN 20 if the last two characters are 22. So we'll click on create new one more time. We'll call this assign to VLAN 20. And once again, we'll do it based on the MAC address. And that's going to be 0011111111. And the last two characters are going to be 22. And if that MAC address shows up, we'll go ahead and assign that to VLAN 20, just like that. And click on OK. So these rules are processed top to bottom. So if you wanted one rule for whatever reason to be processed first, just drag it to the position you want and it'll be processed first. So I'm going to have this policy processed first. If there's no match, it'll go to this one. So now that we have the NAC policies in place, let's go back to our FortiSwitch ports. So here under Wi-Fi and switch controller, we'll click once again on FortiSwitch ports. And I want to focus our attention on port 2 on our switch number 1 right here. So currently the native VLAN is 20. And it's allowing us to specify a VLAN because the mode is static. So if we right-click anywhere on this switch port 2, from the drop-down, we can go ahead down here to mode, and instead of continuing to use static mode, let's go down to network access control. So with NAC mode selected, let me go ahead and refresh this page. So all I did was refresh the page. So the native VLAN is the onboarding FortiLink VLAN. And I just refreshed the page again, and now the port is active, but that client's not too happy because they're effectively in the onboarding FortiLink VLAN, which is VLAN ID 4089. So if we go to FortiSwitch VLANs, and we go to the onboarding VLAN there, you notice there's no DHCP services or anything there. So basically this client who is not matching any of our NAC rules is just sitting there waiting for something to happen. So if we went back to the switch and we did a shutdown on that interface, fast Ethernet 0/1, and then did a no shutdown to bring it back up, and did a show IP interface brief. So here's fast Ethernet 0/1. It is a DHCP client still, but it's not assigned an IP address because there's no configured DHCP services as of right now in the onboarding VLAN. And the port that we're interested in is this one right here, fast Ethernet 0/1, because that's the interface we're using to connect over to port 2 on the FortiSwitch. So if we do a show interface for fast Ethernet 0/1 and press enter, so that's the MAC address that it's currently using, and the BIA says that's the one that was burned in from the factory. So let's go ahead and let's change that. I'm just going to size this a little bit so I can see them both at the same time. And let's go into configuration mode for interface fast Ethernet 0/1. And let's use the MAC address command and we'll just change it. So the syntax is MAC-address And because it's not showing up here, that means it's not supported on this device. All right, let's pivot. To pivot, let's do this. Let's do a show interface fast Ethernet 0/1 again. And I'm just going to go ahead and use this MAC address that it currently has. So let's modify our policy a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that. Let's go modify our assigned to VLAN 10 policy. And we'll say if your MAC address equals this, I'll just paste it in. And then I'll put in the colons in the format that Fortinet wants it in. All right, so if that's your MAC address based on this NAC policy, then it's going to automatically assign that port to VLAN 10. So we'll go ahead and click on OK. And now let's go take a peek over at the switch. All right, so it looks like the port automatically got bounced. Fantastic. Now it's up. I'm not doing that. That was all just automatically done. And let's see if we get an IP address on the 1010 subnet, which is what I'm hoping for, because that would mean that this device is now on the 1010 subnet. Sure enough, right there, 1010.0 with .101. So if we went back to the FortiGate and went back to dashboard and network and went to DHCP clients here to that widget, and if we scroll down, here is our Cisco switch with the IP address of 10.10.0.101 associated with the logical VLAN 10 interface on the FortiGate. All right, so let's go back down to Wi-Fi and switch controller, and once again go down to our NAC policies, and let's go ahead and modify our policy here. So we'll take the policy called assigned to VLAN 10. We'll double click on it to edit it. I'm going to copy that MAC address so I have it available, and let me just change the last two characters to 99. And that way it will not match that client, and we'll click on OK. And then we'll modify the second policy, which is assigned to VLAN 20. We'll open that up, and I'll simply plug in that MAC address once again. So that's the MAC address of the client, which is our Cisco device, off of local port 2 on the switch, and we'll click on OK. So if it matches this, it should now be assigned to VLAN 20. So we'll click on OK, and let's go take a look at our interface over at the client. So here is the client. So it bounced the port, fantastic. And when it comes back up, what we would hope to have is an IP address assigned from the 10.20 subnet. So that's an old message there. So let's do a show IP interface brief. So currently it still has the old address, and we have a couple options here. One is I could just bounce the port here on this device, or I could just unplug and replug that device back in. Let's do that option. So now if we do a show IP interface brief, wow, I still have the old address. Let's go to interface fast Ethernet 0/1, and we'll do an IP address 2.2.2.2. So then we'll do an IP address DHCP. All right, there we go. So it was just hanging on to the old address. So there's the new address, 10.20.0.101. And it got that because of this policy assigned to VLAN 20 with the MAC address matching. The port was assigned to VLAN 20, and that's where the DHCP activity took place. So we do a show IP interface brief. There's our 10.20 assigned address. This client that's connected to port 2 is now in VLAN 20. And like most things on the FortiSwitch and FortiGate, anything we can do in the GUI, we can also do at the CLI. So if we want to see the equivalent of setting the mode here, we could go to the CLI. We could do a config, switch controller, right here from the FortiGate, manage switch, press enter. Then we can type in edit and a question mark, and we'll focus on our switch number 1 here based on the switch ID. So we'll copy and paste that, press enter. Then we'll do a config ports and then a show. So here's all the ports, including this guy right here. So here's the set access mode NAC. Also regarding this device, we hover here on device information. It shows us the MAC address ending in A841. Also it's showing us that it's currently in VLAN 20 off of switch 1, port number 2. And there's its IP address that it has assigned to it. And we can get similar information if we went to the CLI. So if we go to the CLI on the firewall and we do diagnose, switch controller, and a question mark, and we'll put in switch info and a question mark, and we use MAC table and a question mark, and we'll look at the MAC table just for this switch right here. So we'll copy that, paste it in, and then we can also specify which VLAN we want to look at. So this is asking for information about the MAC address table for that switch for VLAN 10. We'll press enter. So in I got the wrong ones. All right, so there's a MAC address it learned on a trunk, but that's on VLAN 10. This client is now in VLAN 20 because of the policy. So we'll go ahead and ask about VLAN 20, press enter. So right here it's showing this MAC address ending in A841 is associated with VLAN 20 off of the switch port number 2. So we'll go ahead and close that. And a quick, easy way from the GUI to see that again is just to hover over device information, which also shows us the switch information, including the port and the VLAN that that device is currently assigned to. Now, another really amazing feature that's handy is the ability from many different screens to grab a host and put it into quarantine. And that's exactly what we're going to discuss a little bit further in the next video, so I'll see you there in just a few moments. Meanwhile, I hope this has been informative, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.